Ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah. All around in my hometown, they're trying to track me down. Yeah. They say they want to bring me in guilty for the killing of a deputy, for the life of a deputy. Well, I say, oh, now.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hoping the audio is working. Seems to be. Today we're going to be, in this lecture we're going to be talking about victim and eyewitness testimony, or eyewitness memory. I know the way that the course is set up, I have these listed as two separate topics to discuss, and that's the way that the readings are separated. There's a set of readings that deal with victim memory and another set of readings that deal with eyewitness memory, but they both have so many similarities that I thought for a lecture, as a way of kind of summarizing these articles, giving some context to these articles, kind of makes sense to talk about them together. So anything that I might actually be missing, or not that I didn't include in this lecture, between those two sets of articles, that could actually serve as a discussion point for either your discussion board or for a discussion paper that you want to write. So generally speaking, though, you're going to see a lot of overlap here. Before we get started with this lecture, though, I want you to go ahead and make sure that you have a pen or pencil and a piece of paper with you. So go grab that now. You can pause the video and come back. We're going to start off the lecture with a little exercise in eyewitness identification. I'm actually going to show you a video and let somebody else lead that exercise. But go ahead and make sure that you have a pen or pencil and a piece of paper. So, okay, you got it, right? So, let's watch this little video and play along. I might pause it, as instructed, just to give you some extra time and to make it less likely that you're going to cheat. I really do want you to do this exercise, okay? So let's watch this next video here.
I'm going to read off a list of 15 words, and you're going to listen as closely as possible, and then when I'm done, I'm going to ask you to try to recall as many of those words as possible, and then I'm going to read back the list to you, and you're going to see which ones you got right. If you're ready and you have a pen, I'm going to start right now.
Okay, so at this point, just listen. Don't write anything down, okay? No cheating. Just listen to the words.
Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy.
Okay, so you should pause the video right now, and even this video, since I paused this one, pause my video and write down as many words as you can remember, okay? And when you're done, resume the video. Just hit play. I'm going to assume you already paused. Welcome back. You already wrote down all the words that you remember. Let's see how well you did.
So I'm going to reread the list of words, and I want you just to check them off when you have a match. Awake, dream, doze, sleep. Did you have sleep? Because if you had sleep, it wasn't on the list. And that's an example of how we create false memories by association.
Okay, so I can't do an instant poll to see how many of you had the word sleep in there, but when I do this in person, almost 50%, sometimes 60% of the class has the word sleep in there. So it's actually pretty common to have this, to recall this word sleep that was actually never mentioned. So I start off the lecture here with this exercise, and usually it's more powerful to actually see the hands go up when I ask how many of you had the word sleep on there. It's more powerful or meaningful to see, like, wow, it's actually pretty easy to kind of create these false memories, right? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Wait till you see the rest of this lecture. Okay, so when we talk about victim memories, starting off here, one thing that we should get off or talk about right off the bat when it comes to memory, it sucks. Human memory is really not all that great. So this is one of the things that I kind of wish I had done throughout my life, was to keep a journal. It always sounded so like geeky to me or something, but I think it would be really helpful, especially now that I'm getting, I'm really only 29, so, but no, okay, I'm in my, early 40s, let's say. Now that I'm getting there, it's like, well, there are certain parts of my life that, like, the details escape me. I know these things happen, but it'd kind of be cool to just, like, thumb back and be like, wow, okay, yeah, that's interesting. Human memory is not good to begin with, and fades over time, and it's influenced by lots of different factors here. But particularly when we talk about victim memory, we're going to see some of the problems that are inherent with being a victim and trying to remember what actually happened during your victimization. There's lots of things going on in there. So just even your ability to perceive things that are happening is severely diminished, let alone your ability to retain those memories and then to be able to retrieve them. And sometimes it could take months or even years for crime actually has been committed before a victim is on the stand in a court asked to recall the events of their victimization. It's a really long time for memory to fade or to be corrupted, right? So let's just start with that premise there. But when we talk about victim memory, mistakes in the process of identification, in terms of identifying their assailant or suspect, can occur the moment that the crime is committed. Situational conditions such as the lighting that is present during a crime can diminish memory strength. So if you have really bad lighting, you might not even be able to really recognize key features of, or identifiable or identifying features of the perpetrator or your assailant, right? So there's a whole bunch of situational factors that are going on. Remember, person who is being victimized is usually in a heightened state of arousal. Very stressful situation, particularly if a weapon is involved. We'll get to that in a moment there. But you basically have to consider all of the situational factors. Is there a whole bunch of noise going on? Maybe you couldn't hear the perpetrator or your assailant very well. You wouldn't be able to point him or her out based on voice. Maybe they were wearing a disguise. Maybe they masked their voice somehow, or their appearance in some other way. Whole bunch of stuff just from the get-go. Situations that are surrounding this crime can really impede memory, even just the formation of memory, let alone the retention of it. Mistakes can also occur during the event. So police will often ask eyewitnesses to examine a photo spread or a physical lineup of suspects, though physical lineups are becoming more and more rare. The photo spreads are usually the way that it's done. I have a little drawing here of a physical lineup of suspects, but a lot of police stations, that's a whole separate room, actually a double room, because there's a one-sided mirror in there. So it takes up a bunch of space, and you can see the person in blue there is our perpetrator or our suspect, or at least the one who's standing out. Everyone else kind of looks the same up there. So even if that person's not the one who committed the crime, we might be more likely to just pick that guy because he's different than the others. But that's a physical lineup. A photo spread is usually kind of, in the traditional sense, we'll talk about how photo spreads have been changing, but in the traditional sense, people would just, investigators, detectives would literally just take a sheet of paper, like so, and just print out a bunch of photos of mugshots of other perpetrators and stick their suspect in there. So you might have an array, something like that, where a suspect, there's a bunch of foils in there. Foils are the people who are not suspects, who are put in there, and say this person might be actual suspect that's in custody. And this piece of paper is typically shown to the victim or the eyewitness, and they're asked to identify, who's the person who mugged you, or who's the person who assaulted you, or the person who raped you, or who's the person you saw break into that house, or who's the person you saw rob that bank, or something along the line. So police will ask eyewitnesses, and victims are technically eyewitnesses, right, to a crime, to identify people in either a physical lineup or a spread. And the problem that exists here with these, there's a whole bunch of problems, but victims and eyewitnesses might feel some type of implicit pressure to identify someone. And they might feel some pressure because if you're being shown a lineup, it's kind of suggests, just by the very nature that you're being shown a lineup, it kind of suggests that the cops have somebody in custody, right? So they have somebody who they think is the one who did it. So this might put implicit pressure, not even conscious type of pressure on you to pick someone out of the lineup, because you assume that the perpetrators, that the assailant is the one who committed this crime against you, or who you saw commit this crime, is in that lineup. So that's problematic, and actually leads to, many cases of false identification. So I'm going to show you a video here. It's a TED Talk, and I know I showed you a TED Talk last time, or before that, when it came to detecting deception. It's because we don't have the money to bring these people on campus, and of course now with the pandemic we can't bring them on campus. And this is a TED Talk by Elizabeth Loftus, and she, I believe, is in UC Irvine right now, and she is the now on eyewitness memory and eyewitness identification, but she is a cognitive psychologist who studies memory. She didn't set out to be a legal psychologist or a forensic psychologist. It's just that her research on memory, particularly false memories or creating false memories, has been extremely helpful and extremely interesting to those of us who gravitate towards issues involving psychology and the law, or forensic psychology. So we're going to listen to this talk on Elizabeth Loftus, because I cannot go toe to toe with this woman in terms of explaining her own research. You're going to hear it from the source. So let's hear what she has to say.
I'd like to tell you about a legal case that I worked on involving a man named Steve Titus. Titus was a restaurant manager. He was 31 years old. He lived in Seattle, Washington. He was engaged to Gretchen, about to be married. She was the love of his life. And one night, the couple went out for a romantic restaurant meal. They were on their way home, and they were pulled over by a police officer. You see, Titus's car sort of resembled a car that was driven earlier in the evening by a man who raped a female hitchhiker. And Titus kind of resembled that rapist. So the police took a picture of Titus. They put it in a photo lineup. They later showed it to the victim, and she pointed to Titus's photo. She said, "That one's the closest." The police and the prosecution proceeded with a trial, and when Steve Titus was put on trial for rape, the rape victim got on the stand and said, "I'm absolutely positive that's the man." And Titus was convicted. He proclaimed his innocence. His family screamed at the jury. His fiancée collapsed on the floor sobbing, and Titus is taken away to jail. So what would you do at this point? What would you do? Well, Titus lost complete faith in the legal system, and yet he got an idea. He called up the local newspaper. He got the interest of an investigative journalist, and that journalist actually found the real rapist, a man who ultimately confessed to this rape, a man who was thought to have committed 50 rapes in that area, and when this information was given to the judge set Titus free. And really, that's where this case should have ended. It should have been over. Titus should have thought of this as a horrible year, a year of accusation and trial, but over. It didn't end that way. Titus was so bitter. He'd lost his job. He couldn't get it back. He lost his fiancée. She couldn't put up with his persistent anger. He lost his entire savings, and so he decided to file a lawsuit against the police and others whom he felt were responsible for his suffering. And that's when I really started working on this case, trying to figure out, how did that victim go from that one's the closest to, I'm absolutely positive that's the guy. Well, Titus was consumed with his civil case as he spent every waking moment thinking about it, and just days before he was to have his day in court, he woke up in the morning, doubled over in pain, and died of a stress-related heart attack. He was 35 years old. So I was asked to work on Titus's case because I'm a psychological scientist. I study memory. I've studied memory for decades. And if I meet somebody on an airplane, this happened on the way over to Scotland, if I meet somebody on an airplane and we ask each other, what do you do, and I say I study memory, they usually want to tell me how they have trouble remembering names, or they've got a relative who's got Alzheimer's or some kind of memory problem. But I have to tell them, I don't study when people forget. I study the opposite, when they remember things that didn't happen, or remember things that were different from the way they really were. I study false memories. Unhappily, Steve Titus is not the only person to be convicted based on somebody's false memory. In one project in the United States, information has been gathered on 300 innocent people, 300 defendants who were convicted of crimes they didn't do. They spent 10, 20, 30 years in prison for these crimes, and now DNA testing has proven that they're actually innocent. And when those cases have been analyzed, 3/4 of them are due to faulty memory, faulty eyewitness memory. Well, why? Like the jurors who convicted those innocent people, and the jurors who convicted Titus, many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people. I first started studying this constructive memory process in the 1970s. I did my experiments that involved showing people simulated crimes and accidents and asking them questions about what they remember. In one study, we showed people a simulated accident, and we asked people how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. And we asked other people how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. And if we asked the leading smash question, the witnesses told us the cars were going faster. And moreover, that leading smash question caused people to be more likely to tell us that they saw broken glass in the accident scene when there wasn't any broken glass at all. In another study, we showed a simulated accident where a car went through an intersection with a stop sign, and if we asked a question that insinuated it was a yield sign, many witnesses told us they remember seeing a yield sign at the intersection, not a stop sign. And you might be thinking, well, these are filmed events, they're not particularly stressful. Would the same kind of mistakes be made with a really stressful event? In a study we published just a few months ago, we have an answer to this question. Because what was unusual about this study is we arranged for people to have a very stressful experience. The subjects in the study were members of the U.S. military who were undergoing a harrowing training exercise to teach them what it's going to be like for them if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. And as part of this training exercise, these soldiers are interrogated in an aggressive, hostile, physically abusive fashion for 30 minutes. And later on, they have to try to identify the person who conducted that interrogation. And when we feed them suggestive information that insinuates it's a different person, many of them misidentify their interrogator, often identifying someone who doesn't even remotely resemble the real interrogator. And so what these studies are showing is that when you feed people misinformation about some experience that they may have had, you can distort or contaminate or change their memory. Well, out there in the real world, misinformation is everywhere. We get misinformation not only if we're questioned in a leading way, but if we talk to other witnesses who might consciously or inadvertently feed us some erroneous information, or if we see media coverage about some event we might have experienced. All of these provide the opportunity for this kind of contamination of our memory. In the 1990s, we began to see an even more extreme kind of memory problem. Some patients were going into therapy with one problem, maybe they had depression, eating disorder, and they were coming out of therapy with a different problem. Extreme memories for horrific brutalization, sometimes in satanic rituals, sometimes involving really bizarre and unusual elements. One woman came out of psychotherapy believing that she'd endured years of ritualistic abuse, where she was forced into a pregnancy and that the baby was cut from her belly. But there were no physical scars or any kind of physical evidence that could have supported her story. And when I began looking into these cases, I was wondering, where do these bizarre memories come from? And what I found is that most of these situations involved some particular form of psychotherapy. And so I asked, were some of the things going on in this psychotherapy, like the imagination exercises, or dream interpretation, or in some cases hypnosis, or in some cases exposure to false information, were these leading these patients to develop these very bizarre, unlikely memories? And I designed some experiments to try to study the processes that were being used in this psychotherapy so I could study the development of these very rich false memories. In one of the first studies we did, we used suggestion, a method inspired by the psychotherapy we saw in these cases. We used this kind of suggestion and planted a false memory that when you were a kid, 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall. You were frightened, you were crying, you were ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And we succeeded in planting this memory in the minds of about a quarter of our subjects. And you might be thinking, well, that's not particularly stressful. But we and other investigators have planted rich false memories of things that were much more unusual and much more stressful. So in a study done in Tennessee, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, you nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard. And in a study done in Canada, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, something as awful as being attacked by a vicious animal happened to you, succeeding with about half of their subjects. And in a study done in Italy, researchers planted the false memory when you were a kid, you witnessed demonic possession. I do want to add that it might seem like we are traumatizing these experimental subjects in the name of science, but our studies have gone through thorough evaluation by research ethics boards that have made the decision that the temporary discomfort that some of these subjects might experience in these studies is outweighed by the importance of this problem for understanding memory processes and the abuse of memory that is going on in some places in the world. Well, to my surprise, when I published this work and began to speak out against this particular brand of psychotherapy, it created some pretty bad problems for me. Hostilities primarily from the repressed memory therapists who felt under attack and by the patients whom they had influenced. I had sometimes armed guards at speeches that I was invited to give, people trying to drum up letter writing campaigns to get me fired. But probably the worst was I suspected that a woman was innocent of abuse that was being claimed by her grown daughter. She accused her mother of sexual abuse based on a repressed memory. And this accusing daughter had actually allowed her story to be filmed and presented in public places. I was suspicious of this story, and so I started to investigate, and eventually found information that convinced me that this mother was innocent. I published an expose on the case, and a little while later, the accusing daughter filed a lawsuit. Even though I'd never mentioned her name, she sued me for defamation and invasion of privacy. And I went through nearly 5 years of dealing with this messy, unpleasant litigation. But finally, it was over, and I could really get back to my work. In the process, however, I became part of a disturbing trend in America where scientists are being sued for simply speaking out on matters of great public controversy. When I got back to my work, I asked this question: if I plant a false memory in your mind, does it have repercussions? Does it affect your later thoughts, your later behaviors? Our first study planted a false memory that you got sick as a child, eating certain foods, hard-boiled eggs, dill pickles, strawberry ice cream, and we found that once we planted this false memory, people didn't want to eat the foods as much at an outdoor picnic. The false memories aren't necessarily bad or unpleasant. If we planted a warm, fuzzy memory involving a healthy food like asparagus, we could get people to want to eat asparagus more. And so what these studies are showing is that you can plant false memories and they have repercussions that affect behavior long after the memories take hold. Well, along with this ability to plant memories and control behavior, obviously comes some important ethical issues. Like, when should we use this mind technology, and should we ever ban its use? Therapists can't ethically plant false memories in the mind of their patients, even if it would help the patient. But there's nothing to stop a parent from trying this out on their overweight or obese teenager. And when I suggested this publicly, it created outcry again. There she goes. She's advocating that parents lie to their children. Hello, Santa Claus. I mean, another way another way to think about this is, which would you rather have? A kid with obesity, diabetes, shortened lifespan, all the things that go with it, or a kid with one little extra bit of false memory? I know what I would choose for a kid of mine. But maybe my work has made me different from most people. Most people cherish their memories, know that they represent their identity, who they are, where they came from. And I appreciate that. I feel that way too. But I know from my work how much fiction is already in there. If I've learned anything from these decades of working on these problems, it's this: just because somebody tells you something and they say it with confidence, just because they say it with lots of detail, just because they express emotion when they say it, it doesn't mean that it really happened. We can't reliably distinguish true memories from false memories. We need independent corroboration. Such a discovery has made me more tolerant of the everyday memory mistakes that my friends and family members make. Such a discovery might have saved Steve Titus, the man whose whole future was snatched away by a false memory. But meanwhile, we should all keep in mind, we do well to, that memory, like liberty, is a fragile thing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks
so
very much.
I hope you found that TED Talk to be interesting. So Elizabeth Loftus, she's a household name in the in the psych community, particularly among people who study memory, and particularly among people who study eyewitness memory or victim memory. So she's a very important figure in cognitive psychology and also in psychology and the law. You can see that some of her research is controversial. Some have accused her of victim blaming, and even some of the things that we talked about already in this class and that we're going to talk about again or more so in this class might be labeled as victim blaming, but that's of course not the purpose. The purpose is to understand the research, right? To talk about the research. Science should not be political, but it's kind of naive to say that science isn't political. Your results do have consequences, particularly if you're studying sensitive topics. So, go take a look at some of my research. I study race, gender, and sexual orientation as it relates to the legal system. There's potential there for me to stir a shit pot, right? I mean, those are three volatile subjects. Right now, I'm on the quote unquote right side of it, meaning that I advocate for for identifying stigma and bias and discrimination and stereotypes around those three groups. But what about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? I would be fired for studying these things. So, not to go on a tirade about cancel culture, but we just got to be careful. Who's getting canceled today might have been the woke people 20, 30, 40 years ago. And in some places, it's the woke people now who are getting canceled, right? So, just defending a fellow researcher, Elizabeth Loftus, and I've had the pleasure, I've met her a couple times at conferences, because she has connections with some of my colleagues at Brooklyn College, some of my professors in the graduate program that I was in, and she's no bullshit, so she can come off as abrasive, but she knows her stuff, that's for sure. And one of the articles that I assigned deals with some of her work, and I have great confidence in her work. So if you have any confidence in me, let it spill over a little bit. But I wanted you to hear from her herself, because you'll be reading her work. Okay, so when it comes to mistaken identification, approximately 75,000 defendants are implicated by eyewitnesses every year in the United States. 75,000 defendants. That's a whole lot of people who have other people say, yeah, you're the one who did it. I saw you do that, right? And we're going to see that, this causes a problem for several reasons, because it might not be the person that they saw. The person being implicated might not be the actual assailant or the perpetrator. But another problem that comes with this is that as soon as the police have a suspect who's been identified, who's been picked out in one of these lineups here, they often stop the investigation. Why? Well, because of confirmation bias. So they have a suspect, right? They already kind of thought this was the person who did it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have arrested the person. And now we have an eyewitness or a victim who picked this person out of a lineup. Okay, we're done here. We got our guy or our gal. Usually a guy, right? But we got him. So We don't need to look any further. So, okay, but what if that's not the person? Well, then the real person is still out there, still committing arson or rape or murder or God knows what, right? So we run into this problem is that any new information that comes in that kind of suggests that the suspect who's been arrested and identified, any new information that comes in to say, maybe that's not the person, well, what does confirmation bias say? We tend to ignore that information, right? We tend to not even pay much attention to that information. And instead, we only pay attention to the information that supports our pre-existing belief, which is we have our perpetrator, right? So 80% of the exonerations for rape and robberies involve mistaken eyewitness identifications. That's a really high number, right? So 80% of exonerations, people who were later found not guilty for rapes and robberies, involved a mistaken eyewitness identification. And only 27 states have laws that compensate the wrongly imprisoned. And this type of compensation is small. So only in about half of the states in the United States will you get any type of money for being wrongfully accused and wrongfully tried and wrongfully imprisoned. And they might give you a couple $1,000 or so. You might spend 20, 30 years in jail, find out, whoops, sorry, we made a mistake. Here's a few $1,000. Good luck with your life. And there are real consequences for people who are falsely identified and falsely imprisoned, and not much help for them when that mistake has been discovered. Okay, so I'll show you another video in terms of just how easy mistaken identification actually is. And believe it or not, the video that I'm showing you is something that when I was in graduate school in 2005, 2006 or so, we used to do this as a in-person type of demonstration, meaning when I taught undergrad psych and law, or I was forensic psychology, when I taught this, we would just get a friend from our lab come in with a water pistol, a water gun, and just like squirt me and call me names or something like that. And we all used to do this as an exercise. Now, of course, I don't do that because having somebody coming in with even a water pistol is, let's just say, times changed. Things that were acceptable even 15 years ago would not be appropriate to do now. But I'm going to show you this video that kind of gets to the point that we were trying to make when we did this exercise, way back in grad school when we were teaching these classes.
It's a Monday morning at Brooklyn Law School, and Professor Margaret Berger is deep into the minutiae of case law. It's gripping stuff.
What are you doing? Stop, wait a second. Wait.
The purse is gone in just 9 seconds, but a room full of law school students watch it happen, and they become eyewitnesses themselves. This is not a real crime. The whole thing is staged for the TV cameras. The purse snatcher, a TV employee. Once it's over, they're asked for a description of the intruder.
I wonder if I could describe him. I don't remember a thing about him, other than maybe odd shape of nose.
The class is warned not to share their thoughts about the intruder. Clearly, this incident, taped in 1995, is not a rigorous scientific experiment, but it does yield the kind of results that investigators run into all the time as they look for that crucial eyewitness, the one whose testimony could provide the big break. Roy Malpass is a psychology and criminology professor at the University of Texas. He was a consultant for this demonstration. The day after the staged purse snatching, Professor Malpass interviews 29 of the student eyewitnesses to get their descriptions.
5'6" or 5'7"?
5'7", 5'8".
5'9", 5'10",
5'11".
6 feet.
6'2".
Descriptions of what the intruder was wearing are all over the map too.
He had a ski jacket on with yellow trim on the pockets.
He was wearing a ski jacket. It was white. The shirt was a plaid pattern. I think it was a dark plaid pattern, like brownish.
In fact, the purse snatcher had on a white t-shirt, a denim shirt, a blue ski jacket with black trim and jeans. The student eyewitnesses don't fare any better describing his face and hair.
He has like a rounded face.
He had a slim face.
It wasn't entirely straight. It seemed like it had some kind of wave.
It was straight, probably shoulder length, or not shoulder length, short.
I think he was slightly balding.
He had a really weird looking nose. It looked like it was off, like it might have been broken or something before.
JP was the guy who ran after the intruder. There's an important reason he remembers something strange about the purse snatcher's nose.
I don't remember a thing about him, other than maybe odd shape of nose.
It is false information planted by Berger, and JP processes it as a fact. It shows just how malleable memory can be. Afterwards, JP doesn't even remember the professor's comment.
I don't know, I've been tuning out professors since I was 12.
So, is there anything odd about the perpetrator's nose at all? JP tries to identify the intruder from photos.
I'd say that's him.
Doesn't seem to have any problem with his nose.
I'm more than arrested him.
Memory isn't always the most reliable way to identify a criminal suspect, even though the stakes couldn't be higher.
Not only do people not do it well, but they don't understand why, and that contributes to it not being done well. So that police would use procedures that don't work very well, and they're completely unaware of the fact that the procedures aren't working well.
Studies by psychologist Rod Lindsay and his colleague Gary Wells show that simple procedural changes in the lineup can have a profound effect on eyewitness accuracy. These days, police departments are much more likely to use photo lineups instead of physical lineups. But live or not, lineups are critical.
About 20% of the time, witnesses are picking someone who the police simply put into the lineup to serve
so
as
20% of the time we're getting unreliable, we're getting a false eyewitness identification, right? That's pretty problematic. And, you know, when we talk about how these mistakes happen, well, we kind of saw a little bit in that video how some of these mistakes have happened. We tend to internalize information, even if it's false information, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. So that professor saying, you know, there was something odd about that guy's nose, became part of the memory of the eyewitnesses. That's not something that they noticed. That's not something that they experienced, and they don't even remember the professor saying anything about it, right? But it became part of their memory in there. So how do these mistakes happen? Well, there's lots of opportunities for them to happen. So mistakes in the process of identification can occur the moment that the crime is committed. So again, what we said, situational conditions such as darkness can diminish memory strength. Actually, it looks like this slide we have seen before. So I think this is a glitch or something here, but mistakes can also occur during the investigation, as we saw before. The type of spread that is used, how faces or potential people in the lineup are presented to victims or eyewitnesses is important, and it can help shape or influence the decisions that they make. Also, this type of implicit pressure to pick somebody out of a lineup can also cause us to make mistakes. Let me just say right here. We'll watch this video here to talk about exactly how accurate eyewitness testimony really is. So let's have a look at this video.
Criminal cases often rely on eyewitness testimony. Sometimes it's the most damning evidence. But how reliable is it? See for yourself. Time for your culprit. If you said any of these suspects, you were wrong. As is sometimes the case, no one in this lineup was the perp. For those that got it wrong, what happened? Did you just forget your glasses?
Well, there are lots of psychological phenomena involved. Mistaken identification tends to result in the person actually believing and developing a memory that's consistent with the person they identify.
So we trick ourselves into believing something that's based off an already unreliable memory. This happens a lot.
We actually have three kinds of evidence gathered over the years indicating that mistaken eyewitness identification is relatively common. One is lab studies where we create events and have people try to identify from lineups. Another is field studies where we examine how often witnesses pick fillers out of lineups in actual cases. And then the third is DNA exonerations, where we know that 3 out of every 4 of the DNA exonerations involved mistaken eyewitness identification.
So if eyewitness testimony seems to be so unreliable, why use it?
We need eyewitness identification evidence. Eyewitnesses often get it right, but we just want to make sure that we do things to increase that likelihood that they're getting it right, minimize the mistakes, and catch those mistakes when they do occur.
It sounds like eyewitness testimony isn't leaving the justice system. So what's being done to fix this crucial form of evidence?
We've developed ways to improve how lineups are done so we reduce the chances of mistake in the first place. And then also we've been looking at what we call markers of mistaken identification. At the time of identification, there are a number of behavioral cues that witnesses give off, or indicators. For example, they're slower to make the identification, they tend to compare one person to another, and they do so with a lower level of confidence at the time of the identification. Capturing those is very important.
So the system can be improved upon based on this behavioral research. What actions are police departments taking then?
They have actually begun to use this research to good effect. There have been reforms made in a number of states that are based on this new science. The science can be integrated at the level of working with police so that they collect and preserve eyewitness evidence in ways that are more pristine. And it can work to inform the courts about how they can make decisions about whether an eyewitness is reliable or not in a given case.
Okay, so did any of you pick someone out of that lineup? Every time I watch it, I always go between number 3 and number 6. Like it looks like one of them. So I totally would have well, I wouldn't have misidentified because I was not confident at all. But if you told me that the perpetrator was definitely in that lineup, as it has to be between either number 3 or number 6 in there, right? So if you say nope, that dude was not in that lineup, well, God bless you if you're much better at this than I am. If you haven't noticed, I'm horrible with faces, and I say that if you haven't noticed, because if you've taken a few classes with me, but then you see me like, I don't really go outside or anything, but pre-pandemic, if you saw me off campus and say hi to me, and I'm like, hi, like I have no idea who you are. I'm just so bad with faces. I know faces in context, right? So like in the classroom or in FitCell, I'm like, gotcha. I know what class you're in. I know how many classes you've taken with me and stuff. Outside of that context, I'm like, I'm really bad with this stuff, right? So what are some of the factors that make us better or worse when it comes to identifying potential suspects? Well, we start off with the beginning of memory. How does memory work? Well, it all starts with perceiving a certain situation. So when we talk about perception, certain variables can affect how well we will take in information that will later go on to become memories. So the memory process might be jacked up from the get-go. And one profound effect that we see is what's known as the weapon focus effect. So if a weapon is present while a crime is committed, we're really not paying a whole lot of attention to the face of the person who is holding a weapon against us. All of our attention and our eyes are focused on the weapon, right? And this would make sense. If someone's pointing a gun at you, your eyes are really kind of staring down the barrel of that gun. It would make sense that that's the case. That's the source of danger at this point. So you're actually in a much better position to describe the characteristics of the weapon than you would be to describe the characteristics of the person who is holding the weapon. So if a weapon is used in the commission of a crime, automatically we're dealing with a potential problem, an intentional problem. Is that you probably weren't even paying much attention to the perpetrator's looks and what they were wearing, right? Your eyes are on that weapon and where it's going. Not gonna really take your eyes off of that weapon so much. The presence of a weapon it's been shown that the presence of a weapon can also affect the processing of auditory information. So we might not hear certain things that are happening when a weapon is present. We tend to get tunnel vision, but not just tunnel vision, like all of our senses, all of our attentional resources tend to get focused on the weapon. So it could affect how we process auditory information as well. So we might not be able to recognize the perpetrator's voice, even if they were shouting commands at us or just started off with chit chat or something. As soon as a weapon is presented, our ability to process that auditory information is going to be affected. The weapon focus effect is caused again by selective attention. We only have a certain amount of attentional capacity. Our brains can only process so much, and it's going to make sense from a survival perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, for you to focus your attention on what is presenting itself as the most danger at that moment, and it's that weapon, right? So we also get into some problems when we get to another component of memory, which is encoding, right? So we first have to, in the different stages of memory, we first have to get the information in through perception, right? Then we have to encode it. We have to take this stimuli and process it in such a way to understand it, right? That we can later store it. So stimuli that are only briefly seen or heard can't be fully encoded. And think about how long it takes to commit a certain crime. Clearly some crimes will take longer than others, but how much time is involved even in a bank robbery? Just a typical go up to a teller, pass a note saying, I have a gun, put all the money in a bag, and like you could be in and out of there in 30 seconds. And now, the bank teller, if the robber or bank robber is brandishing a gun, the teller is focused on the gun, not necessarily the person holding it. The adrenaline is pumping. This all seems unreal, right? There's probably a sense of time. The sense of time is everything is happening in a split second. Any of you who have been in a car accident, right? Particularly like a big car accident where a car has been totaled or something. You'd say, I don't even know what happened. Right? It all happened so fast, and in your head it's like a split second. Now you're going to be asked, what was the color of the car that hit you? Who the hell knows, right? All you know is that you were sitting there minding your own business, and a split second later there's an ambulance there, right? Ready to take you to the hospital. So we don't even have the opportunity to encode this information. Even if we were perceiving it, we're not spending a whole lot of time, with certain crimes. If we only get a glance of somebody's face, or we only get a small snippet of hearing them speak, this might not be enough time, or enough information, for us to even encode this information, to even try to form a memory from. So witness characteristics can also affect how we encode information. So let's say the effects of stress. So the effects of stress are felt more acutely by those higher in anxiety and neuroticism. Now stress, though, is an interesting case, because mild levels of stress actually can improve memory. So sometimes for you to be a little anxious before an exam can actually improve your memory and improve your performance on an exam. High levels of stress, I'm sure we've all been there before, even if you don't consider yourself to have quote-unquote test anxiety. We've all, I'm sure, been really anxious at some point, and you don't remember anything. So high levels of stress are really bad for memory, even though lower levels of stress can actually help with memory. But you can imagine for some more horrific type of crimes, armed robbery, rape, attempted murder, all those things, we could assume that the victim is likely in a very stressful situation, experiencing high levels of anxiety, which are going to affect memory. Encoding just affect our ability to form memories to begin with. Also, we all differ in our visual acuity and our hearing ability. So, we're all going to have different levels of accuracy. You can 3 people watch the same exact thing happen, and all of them are going to walk away with different versions of what exactly happened. This is why when a police officer or an investigator arrives on the scene, one of the first things that she or he should do is separate the witnesses. You don't want them talking to each other. You want each individual witness's account of that event. If they have any time to talk to each other, they might all come together. Remember the sheriff study that dealt with instructional or informational conformity? When we're not really sure what's going on, we kind of turn to other people and not necessarily conform to their beliefs because we want to be accepted by them. It's not normative. It's not that we want to fit in. It's just we don't really know what happened, but this person seems to know what happened. So we kind of turn to other people and kind of absorb their understanding of what happened. So first thing you want to do at a scene, when you arrive to a scene with witnesses, is to get them away from each other and to question them all separately. Also, different expectations about events can influence how they are encoded. So again, we generally have a tendency to see what we expect to see. This is where something like, say, implicit bias might come into play. I was watching a show on Vice. I don't have cable, but I have that Sling TV or whatever. So, I'm answering emails or whatever. I usually have something playing in the background, but there was a show on Vice, like how to rob a bank. Of course, I'm gonna watch all that stuff, right? God forbid I ever get accused of some crime and the FBI ever goes and finds out my web browsing history. I'm going away for a long, long time. But there was one case in there that the robber was a light-skinned black man. I don't know if he was, he was a black man, but I don't know if I think maybe one of his parents were, I think his mother was Latina. Whatever the case is, the point that I'm getting at is one of the issues that came about is like bank robbers are usually white people, right? So when you think about people who rob banks, go back to our lecture on profiling, they're usually white dudes who rob a bank. And if you work at a bank, you're going to get training about how to deal with bank robberies. And I'm sure as part of that training, they tell you what a typical suspect looks like and what they're going to do and blah, blah, blah. But this guy was a light-skinned black guy. So there were wildly different descriptions. Some people said it was a white guy robbing these banks. Some people said he was Hispanic. Some people said Filipino, right? It's like basically every freaking ethnicity out there, every racial group out there, that guy was part of the description. So kind of threw the cops off for a long time. They had no idea who they were looking for. But a lot of the people, the tellers, were reporting this guy as white. Why? Well, because he was light-skinned, or he might have been multiracial, so it didn't fit their idea of what a black man looks like, right? So what happens? Well, you just default to, you kind of assume most bank robbers are white. He might not have been 100%. Maybe he was, had a really nice tan that day or something, but he was probably a white guy, right? Maybe that's what they were thinking. So in my head, when they were talking about it on the show, I'm like, well, yeah, of course, because they probably, were taught that most bank robbers are white, so they saw a white guy. When it was when they were uncertain, right? When it wasn't 100% clear what race this guy was, you're gonna default to what you expect to see. So we see some memories with encoding, well, with the perception, with encoding, but we also have some problems with this other stage of memory, of storage. You got to keep that memory once it's formed, once you're able to encode that raw information into a memory, you got to store it, and memories fade over time. Just a fact, right? Now, with a lot of repetition, a lot of practice, you can try to keep memories fresh, but with a lot of repetition, a lot of practice, you also run the risk of introducing new information that can distort your memory. But memories are going to fade over time, and post-event information, so information that we acquire after the fact, even after we already have a memory, new information often gets incorporated into that memory. For example, talking to other witnesses, why you can't, you need to separate those witnesses, and ideally they shouldn't talk to anybody until they've, not just for that initial interview, but until they get called in to the police station for a very thorough interview. And, in an ideal world, which is impossible, they wouldn't talk to anybody about it, about the crime or what they saw until trial. But, of course that's not going to happen. But this post-event information that conforms to one's belief is more likely to be integrated into memory. So again, we have confirmation bias even when it comes to information you learn after the fact. So you might have witnessed a crime, let's say a bank robbery. You had no idea what color shirt the guy was wearing because you were standing behind him and he was wearing a coat. So you had no idea what shirt he was wearing, but you heard on the news that he was wearing a red shirt. Now all of a sudden, you're like, okay, well that makes sense. Especially, red is a very aggressive color or whatever, maybe, if you buy into, color preferences and personalities and stuff. Well, then that fits in with your expectation that, someone who's gonna engage in a violent crime of robbing a bank with a gun is, gonna wear the color red or something. That's more likely to get integrated into your memory and be like, I totally remember seeing that guy wear a red shirt. Well, now you do, but you didn't before, right? So viewing photographs of suspects after witnessing a crime can impair an eyewitness's ability to recognize the perpetrator's face in a lineup. So even just seeing photographs of potential suspects might actually cloud your recollection of what this person looked like. And I'm going to show you how that exists, or why that exists, in a moment here. But a big part of how these pictures are shown to you plays a role in how much of a distortion this can cause, right? Being faced with, say, 6 people in a lineup there, and the way that people for lineups are chosen can also influence how accurate people are in between who they saw and who was put in there as a fake, as a foil, right? So remember that when we're storing these memories of the crime that we saw, they're going to fade over time, and they're going to be susceptible to new information. They're likely to change. These memories will not stay static, right? And they'll change based on new information, particularly new information that we expect, right? So kind of new information that already fits in with our own biases. Okay, and then of course we have to retrieve this memory. Now, remember, when it comes to retrieving memories, there's probably 3 main times that you would have to do this. A lot of other times in between, but 3 big ones, right? Right after the crime has been committed, so right when the responding officer arrives on the scene, they're going to ask you what happened and take down a report. So you would need to retrieve the memory of what happened and the memory of what this perpetrator looked like right then and there. Then either the next day or maybe the day after, you'll be asked to come down to the police station for a more thorough interview and more thorough questioning. And you will have to retrieve the memory of the event and the memory of the perpetrator again in that setting and in more detail. Actually, there are four main times, right? And then when both sides, the prosecution, let's say this case is going to trial, the prosecution and the defense are preparing for trial, both sides are likely going to want to interview you again in preparation for the trial, and you will have to retrieve the memory of the event and the memory of what the person looked like. And this could be, again, months or even a year plus later after the fact, and after you read a bunch of news reports, and after you spoke about this with other eyewitnesses, or you spoke about this with family members and friends and who knows who else, right? And then, of course, if it does go to trial and you get called up as a witness, you have to retrieve these memories again on the witness stand. Under oath, mind you, right? So, meaning under penalty of perjury, right? No pressure there. But of course, we already saw from Elizabeth Loftus's research in her TED Talk there that the wording of a question can influence how a memory is retrieved. So she asked somebody, there was a group of people, they all watched the same car accident, a minor fender bender. Then a week later, she asked half of the people how fast were the cars going when they hit each other versus how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. And she got very different answers. What were the exact numbers? See how bad memory was? That wasn't that long ago. Do you remember? If so, you're better than I am at this. But I think it was about a 6 or 7 mile per hour difference between those cars. So that was based solely on the word smashed or hit, right? So just the way that we phrase certain questions. Another example here, asking, what was the young man with the mustache doing with the young boy, right? Well, this is what we would call a leading question here. This might influence your memory of the man. I mean, you just introduced new information. You said, or information that the witness didn't provide. What's with the mustache? Well, we should keep that out, right? Because now it might influence how the person, the eyewitness or the victim, how they remember the characteristics of the perpetrator or the suspect, the assailant, right? Also, we have something known as unconscious transference, and this really sucks when it happens, is that victims might pick people out of the lineup that they've seen before, but they're not the actual criminal, meaning that especially if it's a small town or something, or even say small town, you might be able to recognize the person, know that it's not the criminal. Maybe more so in a large town or city, and like you just know, you see this person in a lineup and you're like, this person looks so familiar. I know this person, right? Maybe you that's like a hot dog vendor on the street that you pass every day on your way to school or to work, and you never bother to like get to know them or anything. It's just, or even really recognize them. It's just your brain has seen that face dozens, if not hundreds of times. You don't know where you saw this face. You couldn't. If someone asked you who's the hot dog vendor there in the lineup, you'd probably be like, I have no idea. But they're asking you who's the criminal. They're really asking you, who do you remember committing this crime? I don't know, but that guy looks really freaking familiar. I'm pretty sure it's him, right? Like, I remember that face. So that sucks. The poor hot dog vendor guy is gonna go to jail because of you now, right? But unconscious transference, it happens. It's a real thing. Okay, so when it comes to the different effects on accuracy, I'm going to, because it's at an hour and 21 minutes here, I'm going to stop this now. We're going to call this the victim memory lecture, and then the next part I'll start another video here. We'll call this the eyewitness memory lecture. Okay, so when we come back, part 2, the eyewitness memory lecture, we'll pick up right here. Okay, so I'll see you in the next one. Take care for now.